Yep.
800 meetings.
We do.
So if everyone is ready, I will call P&G to order. Our first agenda item is to approve the minutes, but we do not have minutes attached, so we are going to approve those in our August meeting. And then we will skip right down to our policy discussion items. And Matt, Chase, I don't know if you want to intro any of them or...
I'll just say something off the top that we have a number of these here, and then I'll let Chase jump in. But you kind of have a conglomeration of things, our usual reviews of 8 and 9s, and then you have a couple 200 series policies specific to you all with when you're required for meetings, and then our meeting schedule, a cleanup from the 700s, and then some follow-up to recent conversations just about extra service positions and some ways we're trying to better codify in their responsibilities and professional learning and training for our extra service employees. So, Chase, do you have an opening to the 8 and 900s?
Sure. Well, good evening. The 800s and 900s, I don't want to minimize any of the changes, but we don't have a lot of significant changes. I happily entertain any questions. But as we take the 800s first, really there was some title changes throughout the document, some cleanup based on new state guidance regarding removing the word equity. And then one of the larger changes you might have questions about that you see throughout the document is some language we added to clarify these thresholds or different caps. Adam, that's a change that he brought to us, and we think it makes good fiscal sense for us to do that because those numbers that we had in there in the past are changed sometimes more frequently than on an annual basis by state and federal government. So by setting our threshold as one that's set by the CFO not to exceed what the state or level limits are, we stay on the safe side of that without overburdening the board in terms of coming back and making those changes, or as Adam as an officer of the board, as a treasurer, having to use that to grant the exceptions. So we just think it's a better way to do business to utilize that language. Other than that, in the 800s, again, pretty standard stuff. The other one I would point out, 804.6, the use of recording devices on school property. This is not a new policy. You see the language that we've added. We've been more reticent about enforcing this policy over the last couple of years and drawing people's attention to it and the limitations and what that creates. I believe that Principal Fitton referred to this as like her TMZ policy, where this is what she uses to discipline students that are filming each other. This is the policy that she gets that backing, where kids would get in trouble for posting things to social media when it's fights of other students. But just kind of providing some clarity there, nothing new, but something we continue to lean into as we teach everyone to be good school citizens. Questions on the 800s?
So on the setting the threshold numbers, there's several in there. It's basically like if it's over this number that's set up to the maximum amount, which makes sense. Mm-hmm. But in the 803.1 and 803.1G1, there's 3 instances where it says equal to or less than the amount established up to the maximum amount, which makes it go from 0 to the max. And so I think you can just say anything up to the maximum amount. That extra language doesn't make sense there to me, unless I'm reading that wrong. Because it's basically for the low end stuff. So we're saying it's good from 0 up to this thing in a very wordy way.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's the up to the maximum, I think, that throws it off. We can rework the language on that so that it does make sense.
There's
Yep.
one on page
Yep.
28, 29, 30. There's 3 instances of it in that same section. That's all I have for the 800s.
Anything else in the 800s? Right, 900s.
On the 900s, more of the same, with us updating some titles and really trying to not necessarily take things off of Matt's plate, but just help clarify for the public that you don't need to go through the superintendent. Just go through Kristen when you have these requests, because that's where they're going to end up. Anyway, we're not doing anything nefarious or otherwise. Remember that the state writes these policies for districts that are of various sizes, so not everybody has a Kristen. Like we actually nobody has a Kristen like we do, but not a lot of districts have a executive director of community relations, and so We're just modifying to fit our administrative team here in the district. That's one of the consistent changes you see throughout. Again, we had a change or strike equity from a couple of the different policies. If you look at down at 904.2, advertising, promotion, and soliciting, just again clarifying when you can use student photos and when you can't, and when we need parent permission for that as well. So not a lot of significant changes to that I will point out. The facilities use fee schedule 905.1G2. I need to apologize to Kim. My writing must have been exceptionally bad
I think
when I gave her this policy. On the chart on the bottom, it says ICCS does not allow the use of facilities for funerals, memorial services, or celebrations of life. That's what it's supposed to say. It says does not all of them. But it's not like we're having all of them. We're not going to allow any of them. And then I forgot to finish the sentence, so we will get that corrected. But that's coming back anyway. Kurt and Adam, not Nick and Adam, are working on a new schedule. It's been a while since we've updated and clarified that, and so you're going to see that again in August. But this idea about not having funerals in our buildings has been something that we've actually gotten the request a surprising amount of times, and we've been pretty clear, but it's come up again. And so we thought that we needed to get that in there sooner rather than later. Now, obviously, the superintendent can make exceptions, and we've had exceptions made when it's a member of the school community, but we have requests of people that have not been a part of the district and don't even live here, or not been a part of the district for decades, and we're like, okay, no, we're not just opening our gyms or our football fields to have those things. So we just want to clarify that piece. But the bigger part is as we continue to work through what our fee schedule is and who's allowed to use our spaces at what dollar points. We want to bring that back to you before the end of the summer. So good time on that. And then the other piece, just to point out our continued focus on safety and security. You'll see we added language under 905.1R1, community use of school district facilities, equipments on page 31, that nobody gets to prop doors. And so if you're renting our space and you're propping the doors open, that could cost you your ability to use our facilities. Bad things happen after school, not just during school. And so just trying to keep safety and security a focal point of what we do. With that, I entertain questions on the 900s.
Well, I don't have to make fun of your typo from all allowed.
I mean, we can make fun
You
of
can.
that he's like handwriting notes to Kim instead of like using word processing software.
Well, we don't have,
Spell
25.
check season is a word. So
we
you're
don't have
out.
long enough for that criticism.
This may come as a surprise, but on page 3, there is an address problem. Like I said,
Oh, my God.
it is Butte Road, not Butte Street, for the news over.
Say that again?
It's Butte Road,
Oh, we got it.
and it says street.
Sure is.
I feel like that's my job, is to find
I
out.
think,
You're so
and I think I do it every time.
There's probably more. I looked out the one. So I'm probably not doing my job right. It might have been.
Anything else on the 900s? All right. 200.3R1?
Sure. So this is a new regulation that really we see as codifying a current board practice, but a question came up about, hey, what is the process that the board president and superintendent use when board members have been requested at a meeting? And we looked and we actually did not have it anywhere in the 200s. And so we came up with language and to add to the responsibilities of the board in the form of this regulation. This tracks what process has been utilized by Ruthina and Matt, and so we weren't trying to insert anything new, just trying to put down what we've seen the board use into writing so that there's some transparency there.
No, I don't think so. Like Chase said, we just wanted to have it written down because it's a practice we're using and we think it's also been effective, you know, when we've had these situations come up, and so.
Yeah, I look at it as, we need to codify it because it is what we're doing, so it should be written down there, but I'm certainly open to having the conversation either as this group or the whole board if they want to change how we're doing it. But at the very least, we need to have it written down what we're doing, or we're just winging it every time, which is not good.
Yeah, I think this is one of the more substantial ones. So my plan at the meeting tonight was to flag it for the other 3 directors who aren't here and say, you know, we're not voting on it tonight, and we'll have another P&G where we talk about it. But if you have thoughts or you want to see changes, email, come to the meeting, let us know. I thought I did a nice job of capturing what we, I think it's an accurate summary of what we do now. So if we want to keep doing the same thing, I thought it was well written. I noticed with the 416s, which I think are all new, there's a adopted date that starts at the very top. Can we add that adopted date
Yep.
to
Sure.
this policy, so just to be clear?
I'll
And
handle it, Kim.
yeah, handwrite Kim a note. That'll be really effective. The one thing I wanted, you know, when I read this, right, it talks about to discuss a student discipline matter, harassment, or discrimination against the student or employee, or an employee personnel issue. So I think we all get times when people in our lives reach out to us and say, hey, I want to talk about something that's happening that's not in that world, but, you know, hey, you know, the fine arts at City High, whatever, you know, and we all meet with people individually a lot. And my understanding of this policy is it wouldn't impact those types of, like, hearing from our constituents and talking about school board things. It's really targeted at this universe of issues. And then the rationale there, I thought, was because at the end, if it is something that the board is going to then hear later in a quasi-judicial role, we don't want to have to accuse ourselves down the road. But I thought it would be important that all 7 of us are on the same page and understanding with what types of meetings this policy applies to.
That's a good point, and I just kind of scrolled down to the bottom, because I also thought, oh, this is a great synopsis of how we do things. So I got to the bottom of, you know, following the meeting, a summary's going to get sent to the entire board. I'm not sure we're doing that with fidelity,
Yeah, we're not.
so I think if we're going to codify, we better make sure we're going to do that part.
Oh, and that's,
And when it's appropriate to do that.
and
part.
that's why the next sentence is in there, right, about it should, I think, should comply with,
That, whatever you're talking
It's
about,
not
I
in
think
there?
taken out.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Kim probably
Yes.
can't read you.
I mean, I do wonder, to Director Williams' point, if we should also, I mean, you guys are, we want you still engaging with constituents, right, and hearing their concerns, but also some, you know, I think we could entertain some best practice language in there about redirecting people back to the appropriate administrator to deal with the concern. That's one thing I don't think we necessarily have in here, because it does, you know, if you get too in the weeds with the, does it have?
In the
Yeah.
very beginning paragraph, it says we should
Okay.
redirect requests to the superintendent or the ombudsman.
Maybe I just got fixated on the last part of it there, because that's where it really details out. I mean, I just get nervous for you guys if you get too in the weeds with the discipline matter, or something related to personnel, right? And then if that does end up in a hearing type situation, that role. And so I think having that language then at the beginning, I had scrolled down and got fixated on that part, so.
Well, I think to Lisa's
My
point,
fault.
I think that's where we hit that tipping point where if somebody reaches out to me and we have a conversation, I'm like, uh-oh, we better,
Yeah,
you know, I reach out
Yep.
to you, we make it more formalized, and then you would follow this process of saying, all right, we need a handful of board members, this is the process we want to follow to do that.
yeah.
At some point, it tips into that.
Yeah, and part of it is, right, us using our judgment as to when this policy applies and when it
Yep.
doesn't. But I would be a little hesitant to have a policy, you know, if I have a teacher friend that says, hey,
Yeah.
what's going on with, you know,
Yeah, we don't
what
want
did
that.
we just do ed committee on, Eliza?
Teaming.
Teaming. Like, oh, hey, can I bend your ear about team teaching for
Right.
5 or 10 minutes? As as like the elected person in the community, I think that's my job. And so I don't want a policy that says, nope, sorry, can't talk to you, go to your building principal. Like, that I think makes us ineffective. But these things, I never talk, I mean, these are things that I don't get involved in.
This is what I was looking for when Sean was asking his earlier question, but I found what I wanted to say to that part too. But we tied this to the policy that's in front of it. In the last part of the 200.3 policy talks about the board's quasi-judicial, and that terminology about student discipline and employee matters comes out of that section. So we were trying to hold that theme through from the policy into the regulation to do exactly that, Lisa. Limit the scope, or at least make it clear about kind of what we were talking about in this capacity. And then what I was looking for is at the end, Sean, of the regulation, when you talk about the summary back, the language added about all communication regarding meetings are subject to the open meetings law, right? Because it is a public body. So no, if you provide a summary back, obviously there's things about personnel or FERPA that would be redacted from that, but also an understanding of that when that email goes out, we're not trying to circumvent Iowa code and have a walking quorum or communicate. So it just is also that protection that, hey, we are doing this, but we are abiding by state law when we do it, so that we don't get some sort of board challenge.
So do we need to outline whose responsibility it is to send out the summary to make sure the summary is accurate? Like, if the three of us happen to be the three that are in it, is it one of us? Is it the superintendent? Like, I think if we want to make sure we're being good about what we're sending off, you know, in the communication to all the board, it seems like it should be at least consistently applied as to who's doing it.
Well,
I think that's probably me. I mean, like if I'm in the meeting with three of you, then whatever the summary of that meeting is, then we make sure we handle all that appropriately and it gets pushed to the board. So if you guys are comfortable with that, I think that probably makes
yes,
sense.
yes, we all are, because none of us want to do it.
Figured that too.
I feel pretty confident speaking for the seven of us. But back to kind of your point though, Chase, like, is that meeting summary going to be subject to PDA request? Like, are there times that maybe the meeting is of such a sensitive nature that we don't want to create something that's foilable? I mean,
I think we'll have to evaluate, like, think about the different meetings that you guys have been involved with. Like, if it's a parent situation with a student and a concern about a staff member, I think there's certain limitations of what we'd put in that summary versus when we've met with maybe a cultural group in the community and some of the topics we talk about for improvement, right? Like, we can be a lot more detailed about some of the conversation and recommendations we had for improvement. So I would see those probably as two different circumstances for the level of detail we'd want to provide in any of those.
And what we can do, Lisa, is we did reference chapter 21 and 22? 22 public records?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That way, it's still good to reference it, because then if there was a summary to Matt's point that we didn't want to send and somebody challenged us, we'd be like, no, that summary is exempt from a FOIA under chapter 22 of the Iowa Code. It's referenced in our policy. We've done the work we needed to do there.
You can end every summary that you send out to the board with, if you have more specific follow-up questions, we can cover that in our one-on-ones.
Yeah.
And be done.
Jace, do you think, like, the employee personnel issue, the preceding policy will clarify that for future board members? I read it just in my role knowing that it's probably disciplinary. But someone who got reassigned, or now they're going from one elementary school only to two, and reaches out and says, hey, I just want to talk about this, that's not what we're talking about. Like, a board member would be able to have a conversation about an assignment, because it's not a disciplinary matter, it's not investigatory.
You're back to, like, Lisa's point about meetings that are kind of happenstance or they reach
Yeah,
out with
that we-
concern, right?
yeah.
It's not, yeah.
We would want board to direct them back to admin, you know, this is a matter of practice, but we wouldn't also say, hey, you know, yeah, you can talk to them for 5-10 minutes, just find out what's going on, this is what we're doing, so.
Yeah, I mean, I agree there. I mean,
Yeah.
board members are elected officials, you have
Yeah.
right to speak to all the constituents, and I think it's right, that informal meeting, when they're requested to come sit in the presence of the administration, right? It does say that in the middle of the first paragraph
Yeah.
about that Board members should, in circumstances when it's determined that a board member presence is appropriate for an informal meeting with a parent, employee, or community member and the superintendent. Right,
Yeah.
so we're not talking about those informal
Okay,
meetings.
yeah,
Right.
right, so
Grocery
it's just a clarity,
store,
just so
the-
people know,
it's-
yeah, right.
It's when they want to have a board member there, when the superintendent's engaging, or
Yep.
when Matt's team's engaging. This is the process we're gonna.
Yeah, so you gotta read it in its entirety. You
Yeah.
can't look at that phrase and just say, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Anything else? Other comments? Right. Then 2:10:2, a regular meeting.
Taking it? Sure.
Do you want me to take it?
Yeah, I do,
Oh,
actually.
okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Fine. I think that all four of us have been reached out by President Malone about this, but we do have board policy on when our meetings are held, and we are looking at some changes. And the first change, which is in the policy, is to remove the second meeting in November from our regular calendar. I think it's a good idea. It's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. People on the board are trying to get out of town sometimes. Certainly our admin team, there are people that are trying to get out of town, and it's sometimes a tough meeting for everyone to make. So that's what the change is here. What's not in here is the other change we've been talking about is removing the second meeting in June. So we would still have our first meeting in June, and then we would remove our second meeting in June. And we also would not have our first meeting in July, and that would give us a bit of a school board summer break. And if everyone felt comfortable with that, I think the plan was to edit that change into this policy before final approval. And that's one that we should also talk about the table tonight as well. But I thought with the four of us here, we can get preliminary thoughts.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, I guess I'm thinking about the admin team getting a break, even more than us.
And I think we talked about it at our check-in from our COVID days, right? We do always have the ability, if something is pressing, that we do need to, some sort of financial thing that needs approval, or we do just have the work that needs to get done, we can always special set a regular meeting in that June. But the status quo could be no meeting unless something pops up.
There was something about public hearings, right, that Ruthina brought up, that maybe sometimes a public hearing, we might have to.
Yeah, so two things that usually catch us would be any construction projects, we have going on. If there's a requirement that way, there might be a need for a meeting if it was going to extremely slow down a project. But most of those we can handle with advanced planning, knowing the meeting schedule, and then just any HR related, hires that we need to put through or anything that way too, if there was something along those lines. But the other consideration with not doing the second November one, we're already kind of in that practice, depending on how it had fallen there with the previous language you can tell we had there. But sometimes the canvassing of the votes gets a little tricky with the election too, and probably the one that's more difficult for us here recently is just those program of studies changes, and knowing that's tied to our organization on an annual meeting. And so pushing this to that first December meeting to do the organizational and annual meeting will get us on a better timeline to have those ready to go, so that doesn't get sometimes separated out from that organizational piece. So I think there's a few compelling reasons with the one in November. I also think the piece for June, the other thing that President Malone and I had discussed, I think Molly too, was we haven't had much on that second June meeting. Honestly, when you look at it the last couple of years, just knowing how the school year falls, that first June meeting is usually pretty heavy, but the second June one has been really limited business. And so just knowing with people's travel schedules, it's pretty hard to plan for any significant items at that point too. And then again, like Lisa said, if we needed to, for something that was pressing the district, we could certainly still pull a meeting together.
Is the organizational meeting referenced anywhere else in terms of when it happens?
We looked
It
at
says
that.
Yeah, we
first
checked
there's
that,
we
yeah.
have one.
It just has to be your first meeting that you hold after the canvas of votes.
So we had checked that, knowing, is that gonna create any complications? And as long as we do the
Well,
organizational
that's
meeting
okay
after
for
that, yep.
whatever the regulation is, I was just trying to make sure that it.
I can double check to see if it's in.
Somewhere else. that we
Oh, you
can
mean in
edit.
our policies if
policy?
we have
Yeah, I
reference?
can see
Yeah,
it.
we can do a double check of that too, to
It's,
see if
yeah,
it's
it's
mentioned.
in 200.1 and 200.1 R1, talk about the organizational meeting, so.
And when it is.
Yeah,
Does
I
it
mean,
say
it's-
like in November? Like, I think Sean's point is, does it call it the November or?
Sure.
Because if it says November, we'll have to change
Then when
that.
you edit
Well,
that too.
it's what Cam says, the board will hold its organizational meeting at or before the first regular meeting following the canvas of votes.
So it's,
So we will talk about this at the board table tonight too, but then it sounds like if we can mark up that change with the June meeting
yep.
before we,
That's, I think that's super smart for everybody at the table. It is, I mean, that's just looking nice for all of them, so.
to get a break.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit weird that at the first June meeting, we'll vote to not have the second June. meeting.
No, it is though, it's like for balance, yeah, it's a really, it's a good, it's a smart.
I don't want to see you off about 8 weeks.
All right, anything else on the meeting? All right, 704.4, this is one that I think I asked you guys to take, I reread it, and I don't have any of the heartburn that I had the last time. You probably didn't even change anything, you're just like, we're just gonna give Lisa like 3 weeks to chill out.
See if she reads it differently.
Yeah,
Check that strategy off. No, we actually did make a few changes. There was some repetitiveness that we crossed out in red above, but then the 2 small changes inside the red paragraph, we thought that eliminating the order to ensure softened that relationship just a little bit.
yeah.
And also taking out or changing "are" to "should," because quite honestly, like, if somebody wants to give us $100,000, we're not going to tell them no because they don't want to send it to the family. So best practice "should" because they can do all these things to help us. But you're right, they're not required to. And so, but we did talk to legal a little bit about it, given some other things that happened, but everybody's fine with us having this, if the board is fine with the changes to the policy. That was good.
Any other comments? All right. Then we have a whole series of 416s, which I will turn over
Sure.
to you.
So, and we're not going to go through each of these tonight. I think that we'd actually like to come back and have another conversation with them in the July meeting, correct?
Yep.
In the July meeting, and so if you have thoughts, questions, or comments for us, we'll take those, but we're not looking for a vote before the summer break. But really, these came out of just some work that we've been doing. If you look at Appendix C, which is normally our coaches and club sponsors, and we have a growing number of individuals that are filling these roles that are not certified staff or not classified staff in the district. And sometimes what that results in them being hired, being evaluated, being trained, even being let go in ways that really don't always align with Nick's best practices in HR or what we want to do for other employees. And so rather than trying to shoehorn that into another policy group, we decided to create its own. We also know that the federal government has started to reiterate their focus on Title IX. This is a group of employees that we believe needs additional training and attention in the area of Title IX. So this gives us an opportunity to really focus in on some of those pieces. And quite honestly, for these employees, to make it very clear what our expectations of them are as employees. Again, they don't hold some of our traditional roles in the organization along with maybe their coaching or sponsorship role. So they don't get a lot of that same onboarding sometimes, and some of those things can be unclear. And so a lot of the language is reflective of some of the language we use for our support staff, our classified staff, but just drawing that attention to these specific positions we think is a positive for us as an organization. So it's kind of the umbrella view, but happy to answer questions or feedback on the idea of this concept as a whole.
Chase certainly demonstrates my ignorance in this area. Is an extra service employee under the same supervision and expectations in regard to contact with students that employees in other categories?
They are, Charlie, yes. I mean, in all honesty, our extra duty employees are subject to the same policies, rules, regulations of all our employees. Without this, we feel like this set of policies is just an added layer of protection for the employee and for us as a district. They're subject to all of that even without this set, but yes, they're subject to those same rules and concepts that you're talking about.
Okay, great, thanks.
From a process standpoint, you heard Chase mention July. A lot of times we haven't done committee meetings in July, but because of these policies, we are suggesting a P&G meeting for July so that these would then have the potential to be in place for August when we welcome a bunch of new employees, of course.
And we'll take, as I said, we'll take any feedback that you have. One caveat I would give, and Nick's probably going to share this if he hasn't shared it already. Some of the work that we're doing with the Teachers Association is around Appendix C. And so even as we do some of that work this summer, as we get that work going, you might see some things change in these just based on feedback that we get from Brady and his team as we go through these as well. But this is kind of the framework we would propose and the general approach. I guess I will point out one. I don't know which number it is. I'm sorry, I didn't look at them specifically. But one of the things that I think it's important to point out that Nick and Lucas have been working on is basically a coach's code of conduct. We have a student code of conduct that talks about the high expectations we have of student athletes as representatives of our district out in public. We didn't really have something similar for our coaches, and so in some ways we were holding our students to a higher standard than the men and women that were coaching them, which seems kind of on its head. And so one of the things that they've been working on with our ADs and primarily our secondary principals is putting a coach's code of conduct in place. That's referenced in these policies as well, and it's something that we'll be having all of our coaches sign off on as we go into the next.
And sponsors.
And sponsors.
Sponsors,
And program sponsors, yes. Not just coaches.
athletics,
Yeah.
different things of that nature.
It's,
Just kind of a follow-up is this group of employees represented by the Education Association or any other?
Yeah, I mean, because they're in our contract, yes. They might only be employed by the district through that particular extra service contract. But as someone listed in the contract, they're covered.
It's a really unique group because you'll have
It-
some people who are, you know, maybe a small step above a volunteer within a program or a coach is a stipend coach getting $1,000 to a head coach of one of our programs that, you know, is quite noticeable. So there's a wide range of individuals that this encompasses.
You might split a club stipend, like Anime Club is 2 people, it's 1% of $40,000. So pre-tax, that's $400 for that person. Usually they're
Definitely in it for the money.
clearly they're robbing us blind. Well, that's more, thank you. Yeah. So I mean, it's so this is
And a lot of those individuals are in our buildings.
They're probably in our
working, and
buildings, yeah.
They're doing it for the benefit of kids.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just a kind of a way, like a very small way of saying, hey, thanks for the time you're putting into those situations.
no, and I'll give you, it's like, I think it's good that we're doing this, like, so mock trial stipend, and we had one of our former mock trial kids who was in college come back and coach a team, and we gave him a 5% of the stipend, but I think this would have been helpful for him to understand, and not that anything went wrong, nothing went wrong, he's a delightful human being, and but like, to see that, like, just to get in that mindset that he's an employee of the school and these policies apply to him. But that's a person, Charlie, that he's not in the buildings
Right.
all day. He just comes and coaches mock trial, and he got like $950 for it. So again, in it for the
It's easy to not think that you're an employee.
Yeah.
In that
Yep.
And that's, right, and so I think this does a really nice job of drawing that line, but along those lines, from what I understand, like, we had talked about the Liberty Dance Team may hire a choreographer to do a routine for them. They're not an extra service employee,
Correct.
because that's like, that's a contract, like, amount we're gonna come in and teach, so it doesn't apply in that situation.
Yeah, that's a whole different situation
Yeah.
where we're essentially hiring them for the service to which they provide.
And because they wouldn't be on Appendix C.
Correct, correct. Yeah.
So this is really our Appendix C folks.
Or some of my favorites, like the fight choreographer from the plays and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, very specific skill
Yeah.
set, you employ them for that with a contract, but not in a mix.
That's all we got. That's all we got.
All right, well, I'm sure that we will continue to chat about that until July. Because I think it is a good policy, although there's a lot to it. So agenda setting, so if we pass to 10.2 at our June meeting, we will not have P&G in June, which would mean our next regularly scheduled P&G meeting is July. And are we gonna start over with the 100s, or are we gonna clean up, just finish cleaning
Yeah,
up this stuff?
it would actually, we're asking for a favor because we don't normally have P&G
Correct.
in July, so we
Yeah.
wouldn't start with the 100s.
Okay.
It would just be to do the 400s, whatever we come back to on 210 and 200.3. Kim and I didn't get a chance to chat, but I assume we're in store to get a slew of policy primers from the state here now that the legislative session
In
is
June, I
over.
think.
So we probably bring some of those policy primers that will need to get implemented before the start of the school year as well to that meeting.
Okay.
So we'll have a full agenda.
Either way, we won't suggest a meeting in June.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, either way.
Either way. Because we wouldn't have said, had a June or July, but we're just asking for the July, so.
Okay. Any heartburn from the directors about that? All right, then we will reconvene in July. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye.